Buenos días a todas y a todos. Gracias a las y los organizadores, a una familia cooperante, por haberme invitado a participar con vosotras y vosotros y por tener el placer de presentaros a Rebeca. Dos poderosas razones me llevan a estar aquí en estas jornadas. Por una parte, ser trabajadora del Instituto de Salud Pública del Ayuntamiento de Madrid, desde donde ofrece y se desarrolla un amplio programa de salud sexual y salud reproductiva. Este programa está especialmente dirigido a la población que se encuentra en procesos y contextos de mayor vulnerabilidad. Estamos hablando de jóvenes adolescentes, de mujeres con diversas discapacidades, de adolescentes, jóvenes y mujeres migrantes, en quienes interactúan múltiples factores culturales, de género, étnicos, familiares, económicos, etc., que las sostienen en la vulnerabilidad, invisibilizándolas e impidiendo el desarrollo de sus derechos sexuales y reproductivos, que son imprescindibles para mantener e implementar su salud y, por tanto, para su desarrollo como seres humanos, manteniendo su integridad física, su dignidad, su capacidad de elegir su proyecto vital por sí mismas, con entera libertad y libre de coerción y violencia. Para nuestro programa es básico cooperar con ONGs locales, con agentes sociales, con mediadores, con agentes de salud, de igualdad, con líderes y lideresas comunitarios, para trabajar juntos en proyectos dirigidos a la erradicación de prácticas que cercenan el derecho a la integridad física de mujeres y niñas por el solo hecho de controlar sus vidas y sus sexualidades, condenándolas a vivir con dolor, con culpa, con enfermedades y expropiadas del derecho a disfrutar y cuidar su propio cuerpo. La segunda razón es que soy ginecóloga y conozco de cerca las secuelas que la mutilación genital femenina, sea incisión, excisión y fibulación, dejan en el cuerpo y en el alma de las mujeres. Rebeca está aquí con nosotros, para contarnos su proyecto con mujeres africanas. Ella es la directora de la Fundación Women for Women, que podríamos traducir como Mujeres que ayudan a mujeres. Esta fundación trabaja en Etiopía, acogiendo a mujeres que padecen fístula obstétrica, facilitándolas la intervención quirúrgica y el tratamiento. Durante todo el proceso que dura el tratamiento, además las mujeres amplían su formación y conocimientos, dotándose de herramientas para poder desenvolverse por sí mismas dentro de una sociedad que las condenó a la invisibilidad, al sufrimiento, al abandono y en muchas ocasiones a la muerte. La fístula obstétrica apenas se conoce en los países occidentales, en los países desarrollados, porque procede de la falta de asistencia o de asistencias inadecuadas durante los partos. Y sin embargo afecta a miles de mujeres en Etiopía y a 2 millones de mujeres en el mundo, según la Organización Mundial de la Salud. Niñas y adolescentes con su cuerpo aún sin desarrollar son impelidas a parir por matrimonios forzados, por matrimonios concertados. Cuando además han sufrido mutilaciones en sus genitales, el cóctel está servido para que sus vaginas, sus vulvas, los tejidos blandos del canal del parto, tras días y días de un parto infructuoso, sufran desgarros y destrozos que no se reconstruyen, que pueden ser causa de hemorragias y muerte materna y fetal, o dejar secuelas de por vida con pérdidas de peso y de vida. Muchas de ellas no serán tratadas como enfermas, sino abandonadas y aisladas, expulsadas. Siendo niñas, son expulsadas de sus propios hogares. Es admirable que Rebeca Kisser, mujer nacida en el país exitoso de Occidente, Estados Unidos, cuya trayectoria profesional está plagada de premios y reconocimientos como mujer emprendedora, haya dado un vuelco a su vida y sea ejemplo de solidaridad y de hermanamiento con los seres humanos más excluidos del planeta. En aquellas en las que confluyen casi todas las intersecciones que las mantienen en inferioridad, en desigualdad con el resto de los seres humanos. Ellas son niñas, adolescentes, mujeres africanas, pobres, negras, enfermas, discapacitadas. Hoy está con nosotras Rebeca Kisser, activista, ese es su gran currículum, estar a pie de calle al lado de cada mujer herida, defendiendo su dignidad. Está aquí para contarnos su proyecto, un proyecto vital que pasa por la recuperación de la integridad y dignidad de estas mujeres heridas y también por la erradicación de prácticas violentas que ponen en riesgo la vida y la salud de cada niña, sea esta una niña blanca o negra, nacida en África, en Asia, en América o en Europa. Os puedo escuchar.
Is my mic good? Can you all hear me? I'm going to stand up because I have too much energy to stay sitting down. So you'll excuse me. But first I just want to say thank you for this introduction and how proud I am to be here. I never guessed that I would see the video of Africa and feel homesick. I'm from Colorado Springs, Colorado, and I'm Mary Kay, sales director, as some of you figured out, so driving a pink Cadillac. 10 years ago, I went to Ethiopia as a tourist, a 5-day tour. So I'm hoping that some of you will do a tour and come on and help us. But what happened was, during that time, I ran into one woman who had obstetric fistula. I like to consider myself a little bit educated, barely speaking Spanish, although that was my minor many years ago. And I like to consider myself a little bit educated and a campaigner for women's issues. Because I have many people come to me and say, oh, thank you for helping Ethiopia. And I feel like, you know what, I mean, I do love that country now, and I do live there now, but I don't love Ethiopia. I love women, and I love men around the world. So what I wanted to talk about is how I first found out about fistula, and thank you for the medical perspective. Because especially when I first started this work, I would say, oh my gosh, I don't know the difference between Tylenol and Advil. How can I possibly be working with the Ministry of Health? But what happened is I'm a very, very ordinary woman, and I ran into one girl that I found that she was leaking urine and feces. Little teeny tiny thing. And for Americans, I'm considered somewhat short and way underneath me. I tried to figure out what caused it, what was the problem. As I started looking into it more and more and more, I realized how awful it is. We've had girls that I've loved, and I'm here to tell you their stories. One little gal was married before she was 5 years old. We had another precious little thing that came to us that got her fistula when she was 2 years old. Now, fistula in Ethiopia is most often caused by childbirth, early childbirth. And what happens is as the baby is pressing for the delivery, the placenta can withstand about 24 to 48 hours of pressure until the baby dies. So the young girls often get pregnant in their first, second, third cycles. They're very young, and their bodies are just not prepared for childbirth delivery. I was going to say, we can go ahead and show some of the photos if you want. So this is this is the area where we work, out in the countryside. And to get there, we have to get through a river, and we went over a bridge last time. Actually, 2 times ago, I went over a bridge in our beautiful car that can handle it. And I looked around and I said, oh my gosh, this bridge is kind of scary. And everyone assured me, oh, it's built by the Chinese, we're fine, don't worry. And the next time we went, the bridge was down. So we have to go now through the river to get there. But I wanted to tell you the story first about how I first found out about FGM, female genital mutilation. And I'm glad we're calling it mutilation because it is. The first time I just began the organization, and my goal was to help 5 women in Ethiopia and get back to my normal life. And that remained my goal for some years. Now I'm proud to say Trampled Rose has helped more than 2,000 women in the last 10 years. But as we were helping this woman, we had already filled this space in the Trampled Rose. And I do want to clarify, we were at one time called Women for Women because I planned to just help 5 and get out, so we weren't careful with the name. And we found out that there's another Women for Women International. And it was confusing, so we've completely changed our name to only be called Trampled Rose Incorporated. But what happened with this woman, teeny tiny thing again, she had the nurse in the hospital where she was. We had already filled all our beds. The nurse in the hospital grabbed a translator from me and brought me together and said, can you please take her? She only has about 2 weeks to live, is all we expect. Her female genital mutilation is so severe that although her cycle is normal, her opening is so tiny, it takes between 20 and 22 days for the blood to come out. So because of that, she was so infected, her bladder, her kidneys, they said she's not going to live long, but we have no place to put her but the streets. Could she just stay at Trampled Rose for 2 weeks? That was my first time to hear about, I've heard about female genital mutilation, but I hadn't really experienced the depth of it. In Ethiopia, it's considered a beautiful vagina is considered completely like your palm. The smoother and harder it is, that it looks just like your palm, it's considered attractive. Once again, I do want to clarify there's many areas of Ethiopia, many people groups. I'm just talking about my own experience with the people I know and love. We took her in with us that day, and I'm happy to say that through careful regulation of antibiotics, she's alive today and working, and she fell in love with one of our guards, and she's now married. So that was the first time I heard about it, and I started understanding that there might even be something that could be considered worse than a fistula, which would be the female genital mutilation, which could even cause death. So at that point in time, we started gathering more and more women. We started expanding, and I kept saying, I'm going back, but I was pulled between 2 countries. And at that point in time, we started noticing that I had a form for people to fill out. I wanted to know, let's add to the statistics. What do we really know in countries? Because there's a lot of misperceptions about people. So we asked the women, have you been mutilated? I was surprised. I got the results, and 100% had not been. And I thought, this really doesn't make sense, because with this people group, it should be actually even a little bit higher than statistics we're seeing on the paper today. Then I realized that they didn't know what we were talking about. So we brought in a picture of an intact vagina and started showing, is this what you look like? And every one of them said, no, it's not at all. So when they're delivering the babies, when their bodies are way too small, we don't have good roads, we don't have hospitals, it's difficult. But add to that they've also got so much scar tissue, it closes it even more. I want to tell you the story about another little gal that we had. She was, now the other one was a little bit older when she came to us, but this one was probably about 14 years old. And we were talking to her about how we were going to take her to the hospital and do our best to have her cured. These are just some of the women coming to us. To take her to the hospital so that she could possibly be cured. And she started crying, and she said she really didn't want to be cured. And it's because when she was on her wedding night, she was stitched up, and on her wedding night, her husband opened her with a knife. And she said, please, I never, as long as I have my fistula, as long as I'm leaking, I never have to do that again. I don't want to be cured. But I also want to tell you that I love the fact that this is also a story about all of us. And this is just one of the little girls in our area where I live. And I want to talk to you about another thing that happened, though, that we really haven't mentioned here, is that I said it's not just an African problem. It's not just a problem of women. This is also a problem of men. This is a worldwide problem. And I had one, actually was an Eritrean immigrant into Ethiopia, and he came to me and he said, what you need to understand is that the problem of FGM is not just for women. I can never experience the ultimate expression of love with my wife. We can never match together. We can never have her desire. And he said, for that reason, I'm fighting for husbands too, that this was taken from their wives and it can never be replaced. And I would also like to talk a little bit more about the girls that are with us. These are some of the girls in our program. We do a 3-part program. The first part is pre-surgery care. So we gather the women together. The number one thing they want to do is learn how to read and write. And we, in our program, we're able to teach them 180 words in the first 2 weeks through manipulatives. So they get little rocks and put them together, and then they move this rock and it becomes another word. So that's part of what we do as literacy. Without exception, the girls come to us and say, thank you. And the words they almost always use is, you took us from darkness into light. So unfortunately, there's many girls in Ethiopia that I know that have experienced FGM. This can't be changed for them. I love hearing about the policies that need to be changed, about the worldviews that need to be expressed clearly, about programs that work. But there also needs to be help for the girls that have already experienced these horrors. And the number one help is keeping girls in school. I have one other story that I'd like to share with you about somebody I love dearly. And as women do, actually I know they do in Spain because I have many girlfriends from Spain, is as we lay in bed talking together and just talking about all kinds of things. I was laying down with her one day and we were just laying on the bed together, and I said to her, what was the worst thing about having your fistula? We were actually able, she was a bit older, we were able to rescue her. She'd lived on the streets for over 20 years, just taking in people's laundry when she could. And I was just laying beside her and I said, what's the worst thing about having your fistula? And she said, I'll tell you the very worst moment that happened to me. She said, I got a job gathering some laundry for a family. It was a little bit where I got to stay more often. And she said, they found out that I had a fistula, and that means that I'm dirty. And she said, so at that point in time, they took me aside and they said, we're going to keep you. But we want you to know that first we eat food, then the children get it. Then what the dogs leave is what's left for you. And she said, to watch the dogs eat and just hope that they left something was the most humiliating moment of my life. So, of course, she couldn't be cured, but as a crazy, determined, we got to find a way. I took her to every doctor I could find, and I found out that there was a group of American doctors coming into one of our local hospitals. And through a connection, I kind of went in the back door and said, please, will you just look at her just to see if there's anything, is there plastic surgery, is there anything that can do to cure this woman who's leaked her whole life? And he said, okay, we'll take a look at her, but you're going to have to wait in line. So we sat together and we waited and we waited and we waited and we waited, and finally they took her into somewhat of an operating room with a curtain behind it. And to preserve her dignity, of course, I didn't go with her. She was waiting in there for the doctor, and she was prepped, as many of us know about how the gynecologists do to us. And the American doctor went in and started screaming. He went running out of the room, and he was screaming, oh my God, somebody's burned her, I can't look at it, it's too horrible. And I thought, once again, we have to remember that we didn't experience it. That's why we need to be the ones to fight the strongest. We haven't had the pain. And what I'd like to also leave with you all, I don't have a lot more stories that I want to share, but what I want to leave with you all is that our program is actually called, and this is, I love how, the curiosity, because don't we all have the same desires everywhere? And as I've talked to the men in the villages where we have our program, I have one great young man that stood up. We're working with the teachers and the leaders and the police force, and I'm here to bring you really good news that we're seeing really good improvements. But one young man stood up and he said, please, don't think of us as less than boys. We don't know because no one told us. We have no way to know these things. And as we were discussing different theories, they think that the menstrual cycle starts after penetration, after sexual penetration, because the marriages we're so early, it's improving. We're so early that the girls didn't start their menstruation until after they were married. So, and I thought, if I hadn't gone to the elementary school where I did, if I hadn't had the science teachers, how many of us would know where our lungs are, and where our bladders are, and how our veins work, and how our heart works? And I think the main thing that we need is information, that the people that I love and know are motivated by love. They believe that by doing the mutilation, that they're keeping the girls. One of the big things we have in our village is that we think that it's a farming community, and the farmers are, sorry about this for men, the farmers are so hardworking that they're exhausted when they get home, and if their wife needs to have sex, they're too tired to do it. So they think this is one way to keep peace in the marriage relationship, is for the wife not to want sex. Another reason is they think that the women get clumsy if they haven't had their clitoris removed. So they think that they're helping the girls by making them so they don't break things easily. It's really something that's motivated by love that's hard for us to understand, in the same way that we want to help our children. So information is the big key. But the name of our program is called, actually the motto of our program is called Girls Plus Education equal Obstetric Fistula Reduction. But the theme that I want to leave with all of us today is this. The theme is this: she believed she could, so she did. And maybe this is a crazy thought, but I do think that there's solutions. And if we believe we can together. And so that's what I'd really like to leave with all of you today. First is that I think it's our responsibility to help. Because I don't think we were born in countries with a lot for no reason. Second is I think that we all have misconceptions about each other's cultures. Even for us, from one village to the other village is very different. One of our programs was we taught the girls who had had fistula how to do hair braiding, and they could sell that in the Saturday market. They could sit down with no equipment and braid hair for the equivalent of about 6 burr, which is about the equivalent of about less than 50 cents by dollars. I loved the program because of my background in cosmetics. And the very next group that came to us, which was right next door, we got all excited about teaching them braiding, and I could tell something was wrong. And I pulled another translator aside. I said, they're not telling me the truth. What's going on? I'll leave the room and they can tell you the truth. Well, I came back in the room and they told me that only prostitutes have braids in their community, and that their mothers were going to be really upset if they were doing the hair of the prostitutes. So the difference between communities is so big. The difference between families is also big. But in my experience, what I found is people are open to change that brings us something better. I mean, when we see advertisements on television that look like we get to lose 20 pounds by taking 3 pills, many of us are tempted to try that, aren't we? Am I the only one? So the final thing I want to leave with us is this: if we believe we can, we can.